Hello YouTubers and welcome to Novus Talks with me, your host Novus Corvius. And we're going to be talking about Gremlins in this video because it has been a while since anyone heard about the new movie. In case you didn't know, there is a third movie coming, or there was at some point, but where it is completely up in the air, and that's what we're going to talk about in this video. In fact, I presume many of you don't even know that there was a second movie that came out a few years after the first. Bit of a history recap here. Basically, Joe Dante was kind of forced by the studio into making a second movie. He didn't want to make a second one. He felt the story of the first one was very self-contained, didn't need to be expanded upon, especially because of the ending. But Bros, I believe, were pressuring him to continue making another one, and ultimately he decided it would be better if he directed instead of someone else, because someone else could screw it up. So he made a second one, and he made it with the intention in mind of preventing it from allowing a third movie, because he didn't want it to become a series that got milked. So he made the second movie, and as you can tell, it doesn't really leave the door open for a sequel, merely because it's been a while since I've watched either movie, but the old man died at the beginning of the second one, and obviously about a year or two after the movie the actual actor died in real life. So things like that, there were small little ways Joe Dante wanted to prevent a third movie from happening, and ultimately it ended in a way that was like, okay, there's no reason to make a third one. But except for the fact that one of the characters, Greta Gremlin, does survive at the end of the movie. And I always saw it as a way to branch out into a third film, but the older I've got, I realized that that's ultimately meaningless. She was probably killed off screen anyway, so that doesn't really lead the way into a third film. So what's going on? Where is the series now in terms of a third movie and all that stuff? Well, it was quiet for years. In the last about 10 or so years, there's been talk coming along with a third Gremlins movie, specifically a sequel to the new batch. And it's been going back and forth. The main chatter about it came around 2015. That was when a lot of stuff was coming out about it. Allegedly, there was a script written, and Zach Galligan talked about the movie, said he was really excited to hopefully soon get involved with the third movie. And then there were some leaks about what the plot would be, and one of them involved Gizmo getting killed off so as to give it a kind of horror ending and to prevent, the monsters from being created again and again. And they were exploring that as a way of sort of, if he's the cause of all of this, then he has to die in order to prevent it from happening again. But ultimately they decided against that, probably for two reasons. Number one, if they went ahead with the third movie, obviously if it's successful, they'd want to make a fourth movie. So how can you make a fourth movie if you've killed off the one thing that allows you to keep this going? And then there's the fact that audiences will be traumatized, even though at heart it is technically a horror movie, but you'd still upset a lot of audiences. But if the story was good enough and it was impactful enough, I guess it could work. But obviously I doubt they would have gone that way anyway. But then anyways, more recently there was some talk again about what was going on with the script, and apparently they were going for an R-rated Gremlins movie. They wanted to make it full-on horror in the vein of the first movie. They weren't ignoring the second one in their own words, but they wanted to make it more like a sequel to the first. So in a way, like, the second film is canon, but they would have ignored it a bit more, which is fine, because the second one is an alright movie. It's not bad, but it is relatively weak compared to the first one, because in the first one you had the monsters running around everywhere, whereas with the new batch it was all in one building, and so you were limiting what you could do with it. So the first one definitely, scared a lot of people growing up in the 80s. So I could see why they'd want to take it back to that kind of horror comedy roots, whereas New Batch is more of a full-on comedy. As for like where the script and stuff is now, Zach Galligan, along with I believe the writer or whatever said that there is a script, it's just been shelved. For some reason they haven't made it. The movie hasn't been cancelled. They haven't decided to abandon the script and get a new one. The script is there, just it hasn't been made, it's been forgotten about, and that was 5 years ago. So where are we now in terms of a sequel to the new batch coming out? And would it even be a sequel? Would they reboot it like many of us would expect? Because that's how franchises continue nowadays. People want sequels to an older movie, and then after so many years the studio decides audiences will get confused, so they decide to reboot it instead, and it becomes a mess. And you can bet that's probably what would happen with Gremlins, so maybe it's for the best if we don't get a third movie. For an example, actually, is Critters. In the vein of Gremlins, after like 30 years without a Critters movie, they made a fifth film last year, which wasn't a reboot, surprisingly. It was actually a prequel set between the third and fourth films. And I haven't seen it yet, but I've heard it's pretty bad, it's disappointing, and it's lackluster despite its very gory and vicious effects. And I feel like that's exactly what would happen with Gremlins 3, if it ever happens, is that it would probably, like, obviously the visuals and the actual puppetry and stuff would be a lot better, but the story quality would probably be weaker because they want to focus more on the look and the gore factor, I guess, if they want to take it back to its horror roots. So who knows? But the one bit of hope and the one clue we do have to go on is the upcoming animated series. I found this out about a year or two ago, but apparently they're making an animated series out of Gremlins. I think it's coming out this year or next year. Gremlins Secrets of the Mogwai. It's a prequel to the first movie, I believe. And I think they're trying to say that the Gremlins were aliens from another planet, and it's set on some other planet, I think. Which isn't a new idea. From what I've heard, there was a comic or something, or a novel in the 80s that the movie was based off, or was based off the movie. And in it was explained that they were aliens created by scientists. How they came to Earth or whatever, I don't really know, but I'm sure maybe Secrets of the Mogwai wants to explain the origin of that and bring that into the third movie. It makes sense because we've had two movies, but we have no idea where these things came from. You know, the first movie just kind of suggested they were naturally occurring creatures on Earth, and the second one didn't give any other clues to its origins. So what are these things? Where do they come from? The movie doesn't even ask the question of where they come from. So, as Zach Galligan points out, and as I believe, and I'm sure many of you believe, Secrets of Mogwai is probably setting the seeds for Gremlins 3. They're probably going to see how well the show is perceived, and they're going to try and explore the origins and maybe leave one or two questions unanswered that they can weave into the plot of Gremlins 3 and hopefully expand upon, and then make into a 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th movie, probably. But who knows, right now it's still chat. We have nothing to go by, no information. So I guess the next time I'll do a video on this will be when Secrets of the Mogwai comes out. I'm going to watch it. I'm going to see if there's anything that suggests a third movie. There probably will be, but now that I think about it, actually, it's funny that they're doing this with Gremlins because Critters did the exact same thing. You know, people call Critters a ripoff of Gremlins, even though Critters was written first, but the funny story is that they wrote a show for Critters that came out in 2018, I think. Critters the New Binge. Totally not ripping off the title of the new batch, but whatever. That was a reboot. That was set in a brand new universe, and it didn't have any connections. I don't even think they had the bounty hunters or anything from the previous movies. It was very mixed. A lot of people didn't like it. I think the animatronics look way too robotic and not real enough. I haven't seen the show, I've only seen the trailers for it. But for the sake of new content in that storyline, I guess I would check it out just out of more curiosity and form an opinion myself. But surprisingly, the movie they made for that wasn't connected to the show. Maybe because the show was so disliked and they thought people would want something in the previous movie timeline. I don't know. So I think it's funny now that with Gremlins they're copying the same thing. They're doing a show, and they're going to make a movie after the show. And unlike Critters, I think the movie will be connected to the show in some way. They'll probably explain. They'll probably have a character in the third movie that has connections to Secrets of the Mogwai. That's usually how this kind of thing goes, but who knows? As I said, we have nothing to go on at the moment. The script is on the shelf somewhere in Warner Bros. Collecting dust. We'll just have to see how the show goes in the meantime, and if that churns out any new ideas that are liked, we'll see where we go from there. So I'm expecting this will be the last. This will be the only time I talk about this movie for a while to come, but we'll see. So yeah, with that all said, thank you all for watching, and please subscribe. Novus Corvus out.